Okay, welcome everyone. Before I call the meeting order, I'd like to acknowledge that this meeting takes place in the traditional and ancestral territory of the Mi'kmaq people. We are all treaty people. So before we get started, I just want to do a thank you to the colleagues sitting around the table. This is our last meeting as a team. So again, thank you so much for serving the last 4 years of Town of Lunenburg, for putting your name on a ballot. Your time, efforts, and accomplishments are respected and very appreciated by us all in the community. And I really appreciate the way the whole table actually has treated me after winning a by-election 2/3 of the way through a term. So again, very well accepted. I thank you very much. A lot of people don't understand the time and commitment this job takes from your family and your friends. So again, thank you. And I want to have a special thank you to Councilor Mosier. 12 years on council is really something special. So again, thank you very much, Peter, for your 3 terms. It's greatly appreciated by the citizens of Lunenburg and respected, and thank you. Just a couple of quick highlights before we go any further, because there are a few certificates that Hillary will give out, but I just want to say this is the first council, I think, in the history of Lunenburg that went through possibly, well, we're on our 4th CAO, you are, and I'm technically the 3rd mayor. So again, there are some things that this council experienced in their 4 years that no other council in the history of the town, I think, ever had to experience. So again, thank you very much for your time and your efforts. It is greatly appreciated. And I look forward to, working with you in another capacity in the future. Thank you so much. Thank you. So we'll move on to the approval of the agenda. Well, there is one addition that council added, agenda item 11.5, town lease renewals. We'll need a motion for that. Moved by Councilor Duggan, second by Councilor Halverson. All those in favor, raise your right hand. Motion carried. So approval of the agenda with the addition. Recommendation of the council approve the agenda for October 8th, 2024. Is there a mover? Moved by Councilor Bertle, seconded by Deputy Mayor. All those in favor, raise your right hand. All those opposed, motion carried. Approval of the minutes. The council approved the September 24th, 2024 council meeting minutes as presented. Moved by Councilor Mosier, seconded by Councilor Bertle. All those in favor, motion carried. There are no presentations, and there are no public input questions this time. I think this might actually be the first time since I've been chairing a meeting that there's been nobody wanting to speak on anything. So if you've missed the list and you want to get up and speak, this is the last call. If not, thank you very much, everybody. So we'll move on to correspondence. They're just there basically for correspondence. There's 2 things there. So seeing nothing to discuss there, we'll move on to our, Councilor Halverson.
Just before we move on from there, I just want to thank staff for adding the report in from South Shore Open Doors Association. I look at it every time it's on there. I think it's valuable to know the situation that some of our friends and neighbors are living in, and I hope this I hope this continues with the next council, that they continue receiving this report and it helps to inform their decisions.
Thank you. Move on to number 9, public hearings, public information meetings and appeals. There are a few, so I'll read the rules of the public hearings. Staff will provide an overview of the agenda item. Staff will answer questions from council. The meeting will be open to the public for questions. Each person is limited to 5 minutes. Each person must state their name. Questions or comments are directed to the chair. And once the public hearing is closed, no further discussions or comments can be made. But there's nobody actually signed up to speak. I guess we can just move on to the staff provide an overview into the council part. So staff. Mark.
Thanks, Mayor Myra. Mark Kiley, for the record, Interim Director of Community Development. I'd like to submit the recommendation to council to approve second reading of the amended MPS and land use bylaw to redesignate to residential and rezone to lower density residential the series of land parcels as noted in that subject memo. This recommendation has made its way through the Planning Advisory committee under both the previous and most current public participation policy context with the same resulting recommendation for council. The applicant has requested rezoning of the properties from general commercial back to residential. These properties were rezoned to its current status in 2021. The applicant has expressed concern that the general commercial zoning will cause the loss of the historic residential feel of the neighborhood, impacts property values and aesthetics. The Planning Advisory Committee considered the pros and cons of the rezoning and ultimately felt that historically, the Lower Green Street has been residential and the potential negative impacts for rezoning are minimal and can still be considered compatible with the surrounding areas and the current CCP. And other than 45 Victoria, which they felt should retain its current general commercial zoning, the remaining properties in question were recommended to be rezoned as a block. This amendment request involves amending the land use bylaw to rezone the properties in question from general commercial to residential and to amend the MPS future land use map to redesignate the block of properties from Main Street and downtown commercial to residential. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions to Mark? Councilor Mosier.
Thank you, Worship. Through to Mark, one of the things I found a little perplexing here is that there were 3 requests for an exemption to be changed over. 1 was granted and 2 were denied. When I read the report, it seemed like the major reason for it was it created a non-contiguous zone spot. But in my opinion, that whole area, what we're doing is creating a non-contiguous zone spot. So I'm a little, I wonder why staff they're recommending this in general, and why 2 of the 3 were, not accepted. Well, only 1 of the 3 were accepted. And I don't see really any big contrast between those 3 dwellings.
Thank you. And through the chair, basically, those 2 out of the 3, if you look at the geographic area, it's actually they're placed somewhat right in the smack dab in the middle there. So it would be an even more of an overt sort of spot zoning. The issue of whereas the one on the corner at 45 Victoria, could still be considered in the context of the other the surrounding area as part of that, without bordering on the new zoning and the new proposed zoning. So the issue of whether it's considered, spot zoning in itself of that whole entire area, it was debated, but basically, the thought process was that it's, any sort of amendments to that at this point in time would be, if there's future potential negative impacts, they're minimal. So they did consider that, but they felt it was still in keeping with the surrounding areas, and that's sort of what they settled on. So thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Mosier.
Well, I will argue some of these points later, but particularly with this one, I mean, that is an extremely busy area, and it is probably consistently more commercial and recreation around it than it is residential. And one of the properties that wasn't granted the exemption is a commercial property. It's already a rental unit, so it's not even being used as a residential home. So that's another question: like, why would a property that's already being used as commercial is being now zoned back to, single, not low density residential?
My understanding too is, the general commercial, it is a wider, it allows for wider uses, but basically, it's Hillary, maybe, I don't know if you, sorry, just because I know you were on this file a little bit earlier than I was, just sort of the lead up to historically, the conversation piece behind how they settled on that parcel in particular.
Through the chair, again, I haven't been on this file for quite some time. But my understanding of the history of the file is that the original recommendation that came from Art McDonald was to follow the advice, was to follow the desires of the owners of those properties. So the original staff recommendation that came forward, that was the impetus behind that recommendation, was these property owners have requested this amendment. We double checked with them along that road, and that's what they wanted. So that's what was brought forward to the Planning Advisory Committee. The Planning Advisory Committee made the argument that a larger number of properties should have consistent zoning to, again, avoid any sort of spot zoning. To Mark's point, commercial zoning does allow for a wider range of uses. So for example, a residential home that, for example, its architectural typology is that of a home. So it looks like your sort of typical single family dwelling that can still be rented out as residential units under a residential or a commercial zoning is my understanding. So again, if there are properties along this strip that are currently being rented for residential use, that could certainly remain under this rezoning.
But if I would want to run a cafe or a restaurant on a lower floor and then live on the upper floor, would I be able to do that?
Through the chair, excellent question. Under the residential zoning that is being proposed, no, that use would not be allowed. Within a residential use zone, there are certain home-based businesses that are allowed to be held in a home, but many commercial ventures, such as a restaurant, a cafe, would not be allowed in a residential zone.
Thank you. Any other questions? Okay, we prepared to make. Okay, does anyone in the public where you didn't sign up, do you want to get up and speak? We'll give you one last opportunity, which is, this is a public hearing, so. Okay, no one from the public wants to speak, so. We prepared to move on. There's a recommendation there that council approved the second and final reading. Yeah. Before we move on to that, I'll close the public hearing, seeing nobody else has anything else they want to ask. Okay. Okay, so want to make a motion? Moved by Councilor Moser, seconded by Councilor Halverson. Any question on that? All those in favor, raise your right hand. All those opposed? Now we're prepared to move the recommendation in front of us. Moved by Councilor Bertle, seconded by the Deputy Mayor. The recommendation is that council approve the second and final reading of the amended municipal planning strategy and land use bylaw to redesignate, I'm not going to read off all the PIDs, to residential and rezone them lower density residential. So that's the motion. Any further discussion on the motion? Councilor Moser.
You know, I may as well go out like a lion, defeated rather than a lamb, you know, so. Well, again, I wasn't in favor of this in the beginning. That is a very busy area. I know that firsthand. I lived there for 8 years. And that was probably one of the reasons for me moving, having small children. It wasn't a great place to live. But consistent zoning promotes good planning and good community. The key to this area is that it is flat and centrally located, already surrounded by commercial and recreational zoning that complements mid and dense residential. Now, I've counted what's within a very short walk. And when I say a short walk, I'd say from the Knott to the Irving station. And I've counted 5 or more eating establishments, a grocery store, hardware store, 2 gas stations / convenience stores, auto supply parts store, an auto repair shop, construction company, an oil and heating supply office, upholstery shop, art studio, physio clinic, mental health practice, animal hospital. And that's not to mention on the recreation side, we have an arena, community center, curling club, ball field, soccer field, track, skate park, bowling alley, tennis courts, playground, and finally a school. And that makes for a very, very busy area, along with the fact that it's a main artery that leads into Old Town. All this activity is in direct conflict with the quiet enjoyment of one's property that comes with low density zoning. So we've created a conflict here with the residents. They have the right to complain about the activity that's taking place around them if we zone it this way. Plus, we have a handful of exceptions thrown in to create further conflict. And we do have, an exception here and there. And whether it's on the outlying area or not, you have to draw a line in the sand somewhere. And wherever you decide to draw the line is an area of conflict. We continue to push medium and high density housing on the outskirts of town, like out beyond Centennial Avenue and even Blockhouse Hill, where in all likelihood in those areas, that's going to be a 2-vehicle family, where here we are smack dab in the middle of town, where this zoning makes the most sense. It's very walkable and vehicles aren't required. So we should not appease to the wants of the few at the expense of the many. So I think this zoning will create further headaches for council and staff down the road, and I would urge council not to vote for this to go through.
Any other discussion on the motion? Councillor Halverson.
I have to admit, when a block of residents who share a street and share a neighborhood come forward with a concern like this, I'm inclined to listen, because it's, they're the ones who live there. But in listening to Councillor Mosher, what he was saying, part of what he said resonated with me there, and I'm concerned about the low density residential causing complaints because of the commercial and recreational zoning around it. The council has provided exemptions for special events at the community center, some of the fundraising that's going on, the curling, all those events that happen down there. We do 5 or 6 in the year. So my concern is, do we feel, I'll put this perhaps through to our interim CAO. Do we feel like, to Councilor Mosher's points, we're opening up, by making this change, are we opening up more complaints to staff? Are we going to be creating disharmony instead of the peace with our neighbors that we're trying to achieve here? Recognizing we could do, we can provide exemptions on a case-by-case basis for special events. But I'm more concerned with, as Councilor Mosher pointed out, perhaps there's an event happening some night on the tennis courts. And I know that the residents there have a good relationship with the folks who play tennis. So I recognize that. But what happens if some reason, some night there is something going on? I can see the problem. So what I'm asking the interim CAO is, does staff share Councilor Mosher's concern about creating conflict with this change?
Through the chair, if staff could, with absolute certainty, predict what will and will not create conflict in a community, my job would be much simpler. So it's a tricky question that you're posing, because again, it is very future oriented, and I cannot definitively say how the ramifications of any decision with absolute certainty. To Mosher's point, and to sort of reiterate my original comments, again, the thrust of the original memo that came from then Director of Community Development, Art McDonald, was based again in the historical use of these specific properties, not the surrounding area per se. And again, his desire to honor the wishes of the group of residents that requested the amendment, recognizing that from a planning perspective, it was deemed to not have an overall detrimental effect. Again, choosing to make an amendment based on an amendment request, and what type of precedent that might set, is ultimately council's decision.
I appreciate, again, we do an awful lot of asking to look into crystal balls around here, but we all know that's not possible. The other concern I have is beyond the tennis court. As Councilor Mosher pointed out, there's the auto parts store. I mean, what happens if at some point that wants to change hands and become a garage? It would be, my understanding, that could happen there. That would be noise at a different time. I think that this may have to go in with the understanding, perhaps if this does pass tonight, that because it's a specific block of houses, perhaps the residents there will just need to understand that you are in a residential zone, but you're in a residential zone set amongst a commercial area. So there may have to be some give and take in the future if these situations arise. I guess is the only thing I'd like to point out. But
Yeah, if I may add my 2 cents worth, first of all, basically, this has been residential forever since I was basically born. It was changed in 2021 when they did the swooping changes to the MPS and LUB, which was done. This is why we're having complaints, which was done basically in the midst of a pandemic when nobody was really paying attention and the owners were complaining because they didn't feel they were notified properly, whether they were or weren't, is an argument for another day. So they came to us. They've been there some of them have lived there for 80 years with the curling club, the rink, the tennis court, and an actual working service station where the veterinarian hospital is for years. So, and a lot more active area commercially wise than it is now. When the foundry was fully functional and where West Nova office is now, that was an industrial thing. The dairy was to the right of the school. So I think the residents that live there now certainly realize what they have, and that's why they came to us. I'm not saying in the future, if they would sell those properties and other people would buy them, we might not get complaints and we'd have to deal with it at that time. But based on the fact that the residents came to us, felt that it was changed to commercial really without proper notice, and whether it was or wasn't is an argument for another day. Staff looked at it and said, okay, we'll change it back, right? I think we'd be doing an injustice to those residents if we decided at this point, especially this far along in the process, to now say, no, we're not going to change it back to residential. That's my opinion, but it's certainly on the floor as a motion. We can vote on it here now, but that's how I feel about it. I mean, it was certainly more active there when I was a child growing up than it is now commercially, right? And they were okay with it then. And there was, I remember the Grilling Club beer garden days, and they didn't seem to complain back then. So it's a less active at day and at night there than it is now. So I don't think we'll have to worry about the residents that live there complaining too much about the noise at this point. But there is a motion on the floor. Does anyone have anything else?
I just
Councilor
want to
Howard.
just finish off there. I mean, that's basically my point, is that I understand that the folks who are there now, they understand they've been through it, but we don't know when change hands. I just want to make sure that if this change goes through, that people aren't moving in with the expectation that we're moving into a quiet residential zone, because that is clearly not what that area will ever be because of what's around it. So I just want to make sure that there's no misconception there. If somebody does buy into those properties, that's what they're moving into.
Councilor Mosher.
Well, that's exactly my point. I mean, I wasn't unfamiliar with, the structure of Lunenburg when I bought that house there, but I did not realize how busy it was there. And that's what the case will be if someone new comes in there. And having this zoning, it does give them the right to complain and be heard and be reckoned with, because that's, that's the way it's been zoned. So it could be to the detriment to, some of the commercial activity and recreation activity that goes on there.
Councilor Duggan.
Where along this process was it decided that it would be rezoned to low density residential?
Through the chair, I believe this was very early on in the process. I think it was the first iteration through the original public participation. So approximately about a year ago. through the.
I
through the
think
planning
that's what they
advisory committee.
requested when they brought it back to
Yeah.
the council.
Okay, and is there room now to adjust that? I mean, low density is sort of, as Councillor Moser or Deputy Mayor Moser said, it's sort of the opposite of what we're, Councillor. Last meeting and I'm not getting it. I know, and I flipped back and forth too, is sort of going along with what he said, is sort of the opposite of what we're trying to do, in town. Low density to me means that, there is actually a lot in that area that is completely empty. It doesn't lend itself well to potentially building something that could be, a fourplex or accommodate more than one residential home in that area moving forward. So can we make an adjustment to that before this goes through? Is there still time to do that? The other thing, the other part of it is that there are those properties that did not want to be included in this. And I know that there was an argument against why we would do that, and it's sort of splitting it. But if we do move forward, I think that I'd like to move a motion or put forward a motion that does not include those properties. I think that if they don't want those adjustments done and they want to stay as is, that they should be allowed to do that as requested.
Excuse me, I'll have to defer to CAO or as far as the due process with this.
Thank you, Mark. Through the chair, I would recommend that that should council wish to go in a different direction than has been done. Again, because this is a planning amendment and planning amendments have different advertising and notification requirements, I would recommend that council refer this back to the Planning Advisory Committee so that the notices could be reissued and public participation and a public hearing could be rescheduled. Again, so that those in the community have ample opportunity to come and speak on the proposed change.
Deputy Mayor.
Thank you. I definitely understand where you're coming from, but personally, I think this matter has been strung out long enough, and I think that it's time that this reaches a fruition one way or another. So I would feel much more comfortable that this get dealt with tonight.
Anybody else? Councillor Halverson.
Well, just as I recall at the public hearing, I mean, we did have opportunity for people to speak, and to Councillor Duggan's point, nobody, someone correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't actually remember anyone raising an issue about the density zoning. So I don't know, it seems a bit 11th hour to, we've been this far along to try and start making changes like that. I think, to the deputy mayor's point, I think it's this point we've wrestled with it. Let's put it on the table and see where we land.
Okay, anybody else? Okay. All those in favor of the recommendation, raise your right hand. All those opposed, raise your right hand. Motion carried 4-2 with Councillor Duggan and Councillor Mosier voting in the negative. Thank you very much, everybody. Now we're going to move on to 9.2, which is the amending the MPS to consistent with the Old Town Lunenburg Heritage Conservation District Plan and Bylaws. So Mark, you're up.
Thank you, Mayor. I'd like to present the recommendation that council approve the second and final reading of the amended MPS as presented in attachment A of the subject memo to ensure consistency between the MPS and the Old Town Lunenburg Heritage Conservation District Plan and Bylaw. This recommendation was brought forward by the Planning Advisory Committee at the August 21st, 2024 meeting, and basically brings the language in the MPS in line with the town's current planning context and current status of the HCD plan and bylaw. In sections 5.3.1 and 5.3.2 of the MPS, it removes references to upcoming work that is already complete and aligns the language in policy 5-4 of the MPS with policy 47 in the HCD plan and bylaw. Staff feel that the proposed amendments are administrative in nature and do not materially change the intent of the town's MPS, which remains to conserve Old Town Lunenburg National Historic Site and World Heritage Site. It should also be noted that these amendments are in keeping with the recommendation from the province in its review of the HCD plan and bylaw. Thank you.
Does anybody, before I close anything first, I'll ask council, do you have any questions for Mark? Okay, and I'll ask the public once again. Does anyone from the public at this public hearing have anything they'd like to add? Okay. Oh. Okay, yeah, no problem. Thank you. Thank you. Maybe just pull closer to you or something. Okay, thank you. So nobody has anything to say on this. So there's recommendation 1 that council close the public hearing regarding the amendment of the municipal planning strategy to ensure consistency with Old Town Lunenburg Heritage Conservation District Plan and Bylaw. Is there someone moved by Councilor Moser, seconded by Councilor Halverson? All those in favor, raise your right hand. All those opposed, motion carried unanimous. Recommendation number 2, that council approve the second and final reading of the amended MPS as presented in attachment A to ensure consistency between the MPS and the Old Town Lunenburg Heritage Conservation District Plan and Bylaw. Is someone prepared to move that? Deputy Mayor, seconded by Councilor Bertels. Any questions or discussions on this one? Councilor Halverson?
Just reiterate what Mark is saying. I mean, this is something we need all those pieces of legislation to line up. The province has signed off. Put it on the table.
So anything else? Okay, all those in favor, raise your right hand. All those opposed, motion carried unanimous. Okay, so now there's nothing under number 10. Number 11, new business. There is an inspection services agreement amendment request. There's a recommendation there, but I'll get Hillary to present it first.
Good evening again. Thank you so much. As you know, on April 23rd, 2024, Council voted in favor of a shared inspection service agreement. On September 9th, the town was notified the region of Queens municipality has requested to change the agreement. In particular, they're asking for the addition of a new clause 35A such that municipalities will not be responsible for budgeted costs, commitments, or liabilities where said new costs, commitments, or liabilities lead to a municipality submitting a notice of withdrawal from the joint service agreement, i.e. if something new is being added to the budget, with which one municipality feels strongly warrants their withdrawal from the agreement, the town would not be held responsible for paying for the issue, the service, the budgeted cost, commitment, or liability that they objected to. As such, staff are seeking a new motion accepting the amended joint service agreement.
Thank you. So there is a recommendation in front of us that council accept the amended inspection services agreement as presented in attachment A. Someone willing to move that motion? Moved by Councilor Duggan, seconded by Councilor Moser. Any discussion or questions on the motion? All those in favor, raise your right hand. Motion carried unanimous. We'll now move on to 11.2, Sustainable Infrastructure Grant Program Evaluation and Delivery Framework, Request for Direction. Hillary?
Thank you so much. Again, on April 23rd, council directed staff to revise the street extension policy and create a sustainable infrastructure fund in 2024-2025. The Department of Community Development will bring forward a draft grant program and fund this fall. But staff are seeking any feedback this council may have at this time since they initiated this project. We look forward to your thoughts.
Thank you. So there is no recommendation. It's a report that we can deal with tonight. I'll give you like my 2 cents worth. There could be a whole new 7 people sitting here after the 19th. This is a pretty serious document for the town moving forward. So I think in fairness to the community, it would only be fair that this document gets dealt with after the 19th. That's my personal feeling. I think this would be basically a rushed decision at the last second if we did too much on here. So that's just my opinion. How does everybody else feel?
No, I mean, I don't think I was looking for a decision. They're just want input, right? Tonight, if we had any suggestions, I mean, frankly, I'm actually inclined to agree with the mayor here that I think let's leave this solidly in the court of the next council, seeing as this is a brand new policy that they're going to be dealing with. I'm sure they'll be getting lots of feedback and there'll be lots of community involvement. So happy to leave my 2 cents out of that, and maybe I'll make a comment as a citizen. We'll see.
Sure, we'll all get our 3 minutes if we want it later. So anybody else have anything they'd like to say? Okay, so we're just going to move along then. Okay, so 11.3 and 11.4 are just different information reports. If anybody does have any questions, Tyson is here, but if not, we'll just move along. Thank you very much, Tyson, for coming tonight. Thank you. So 11.5 are the additions that we added, and they put it on my agenda with green highlight. They don't realize my age. So first I'll get Hillary to present, and then I'll waive the notice. So you present first, Hillary.
Many thanks. And I sincerely appreciate your adding this administrative matter to the agenda as we strive to support our tenants. Staff are seeking authority to extend 2 leases. The first is Second Story Women's Center's lease. They lease the premises at 18 Dufferin Street, also known as the former train station, and we would like to extend their lease until October 31st, 2025. The second lease is the South Shore Regional Center for Education's Lunenburg Academy lease, which we recommend extending until July 31st, 2025. We also recommend increasing both renters' rates by the Nova Scotia CPI of 2%, as is standard practice in lease administration within the municipality. Both have been good and reliable tenants and provide valuable services to the community, such as counseling and early childhood education. Under Section 51 of the Municipal Government Act, council may lease municipal property through a council motion. Thank you.
Thank you. So the first thing we'd have to do is waive the notice. So the council waive notice to make a decision on the lease extension for the CN station building at 18 Dufferin Street to Second Story Women's Center. Is someone prepared to move that? Moved by Councillor Moser, seconded by Councillor Halverson. Any discussion? All those in favor, raise your right hand. Motion carried unanimous. Now we need the main motion. That council extend the current lease of the CN station building at 18 Dufferin Street to Second Story Women's Center for 1 additional year, with the new expiration date set as October 31st, 2025, and rent adjusted by the Consumer Price Index for Nova Scotia. The mayor and CAO are authorized to execute the lease on behalf of the town of Lunenburg. Is someone prepared to move that? Moved by Councillor Moser, seconded by Councillor Halverson. All those in favor, raise your right hand. Motion carried unanimous. Now we need to waive the next one. The council waive notice to make a decision on the lease extension for a portion of 97 Callback Street to South Shore Regional Center for Education. Is someone prepared to move that? Moved by Councillor Duggan, second by Councillor Halverson. All those or any discussion? All those in favor, raise your right hand. So now we're on motion carried unanimous. Main motion, that council extend the current lease of a portion of 97 Callback Street to South Shore Regional Center for Education for 1 additional year, with the new expiration date set as July 31st, 2025, and rent adjusted by the Consumer Price Index for Nova Scotia. The mayor and CAO are authorized to execute the lease on behalf of the town of Lunenburg. Is someone prepared to move that? Moved by Councillor Bertle, seconded by Councillor Moser. Any discussion on that? All those in favor, raise your right hand. Motion carried unanimous. Thank you very much, everybody. So now we'll move on to notices of motion, information requests, and council reports. There's one notice of motion, 12.1, renaming of Cornwallis Street. Councillor Halverson.
Thank you, Mayor. So as Councillor Moser said last week, he admires my tenacity No. I'm bringing this forward because this has been very divisive. We talked about it at the committee of the whole, but we've yet to have any proper resolution with the town. When this first came forward, this motion first came forward to rename Cornwallis Street, it was brought forward to council, and we were asked in the spirit of reconciliation to change that name because it was offensive to our Mi'kmaq neighbors. I don't need to get into Cornwallis. We all know the history there. And we all said that that's a reasonable thing to do. I believe it was unanimous, if I'm not mistaken. We all agreed to do that. So I've asked repeatedly for someone to explain how renaming Cornwallis to Queen aligns with reconciliation. And the only answer I've been given is that we put this out to the public, and this was the decision that was made. Now, that doesn't answer the question. That answers the process, but it doesn't answer the question, does this achieve reconciliation? So I would love to have that discussion tonight if anyone's willing to come forward and explain why renaming Cornwallis to Queen is in the spirit of reconciliation. It's a tough issue, and it's a tough issue that we wouldn't normally struggle with at the municipal council table. These are issues that are normally handled in nation to nation. Very, very few instances do we get a chance to participate in this. At the beginning of each of our meetings, we acknowledge that we live on land that was appropriated from the Mi'kmaq. We live on Mi'kmaq land. We say so. And that is uncomfortable because we have to grapple with the realization that all of us here live on land that belonged to somebody else generations ago and was never given up, so technically still does. And that makes it awkward. I mean, it makes it awkward because I think we live in a community of good people who want to treat people fairly and who want to do right by people. So I struggle because this is a relationship that our country has struggled with. Consistently, Indigenous people have come to various levels of government who have made promises and have never followed through on them. They've experienced horrors that we can't imagine, generational trauma that no one should have to go through. And I don't feel like this is a council that breaks promises. I feel like we're good people around this table. I feel like we all agreed that we wanted to move forward and work towards a solution that makes amends as best we can in the spirit of reconciliation. So that's why I'm asking at this point for my fellow councillors to join me in following through on our promise to move forward in reconciliation with a name that's fitting for reconciliation. That's why I asked. There's only 2 points in as far as I know, I could be corrected, in this process where we had any Indigenous consultation at all. One was at our anti-racism committee, who requested San Juan Street. The other was an unsolicited letter from Elder Dan Paul, who's the man who actually brought forward the issue of Cornwallis and how problematic that is. And unsolicited, he proposed Reconciliation Street. So I asked my fellow councillors to join me in following through on our promise. I look to somebody to second my motion to rescind this motion to approve Queen Street as the name for Cornwallis. And I look for more support in renaming Cornwallis Street to either of those other 2 names, San Juan or Reconciliation Street. Thank you.
So you're making the draft motion number one then, Councillor Halverson?
I believe that's the process we have to start with. I'll make draft number one first. The council rescind the motion made at the November 20th, 2023 council meeting, which stated council approve Queen Street as the new name for Cornwallis Street.
It's been moved. Is there a seconder for that motion? Is there a seconder for the motion?
The motion was that council rescind the motion made at the November 28th meeting, which stated that council approve Queen Street as the new name for Cornwallis Street.
So it's a motion made to rescind the original motion made in November 28th to approve Queen Street as Cornwallis. So basically, if we pass this motion and then don't pass the next motion, it would be Cornwallis Street.
That's what it looks like.
Okay. All those in favor, any further discussion on this motion first? Any further discussion on this? Councillor Halverson.
Well, I would ask of the councillors who are supportive of Queen, if perhaps if you could give us some reason why. How does Queen align with reconciliation in renaming from Cornwallis? As was pointed out, Cornwallis was the governor who who committed atrocities in the name of the crown, and now we're renaming the street for the crown that those atrocities were committed for. So I just ask if I'm missing something, if someone could explain why that's appropriate.
Anybody around the table want to respond to Councillor Halverson's request? Councillor Bertels.
I'm sure you're the last person that was going to talk to you about this subject tonight, as we all know where this leads to. This hits home for the simple fact of what took place back before Christmas with you and I, Ed. And if you want to know why I think Queen Street is because I didn't live or move or anything for the town of Lunenburg of a street name. I'm here because of the community. I live at 101 Fox Street, and I don't live there because I think I'm a fox. I don't live there because I think I'm in nature. I live there because I wanted my kids to go up there and I wanted to be in the community. I respect your coming forward. I'm just wondering where your support is because I don't see them in the galley. I don't see them wanting the street to be renamed tonight.
Thank you. Councillor Halverson.
The chair. So I take your point and I appreciate what you're saying. I don't think it's a literal, I don't think anyone who lives on Cornwallis thinks they're a Cornwallis, and I don't think they would think they're a queen if the name was changed. But it's not about who we think we are. It's about an act of reconciliation. It's about making amends in the very limited way that we as a municipality can. People came to us with concerns. They came to us with hurt. And we all sat around this table and said we didn't want that. And that's where I'm coming from. And I know, there are people in this town who don't want to see a street name changed. Okay. But we had this conversation earlier. Sometimes there's a thing called the tyranny of the majority. It's not just because most people want something, doesn't always make it right, right? There are plenty of examples we could go back where there were instances where the majority felt that something was right, and we'd look at it from a modern lens and say we would never do that now because that's abhorrent to us. Reconciliation's about small steps. We have Labrador Park, we have Sylvia Park, and we have a whole lot of street names that, have a lot of, let's be frank, dead white guys' names up there. And that's fine, But what we've heard is that this one name does cause hurt to a faction of our community. And I would think that if if there was a name that you felt was offensive, that like, pained you to have to walk by, to have your children walk by, that resonated with you because of your family history and the trauma that your family has been through, that we would listen and that we would take steps to make a change. It's not, you know, this isn't just to change a name. If it was just to change a name, we would have been through this long, long ago. As we said, I mean, obviously names have meaning, which is why everyone's so passionate about this and why we're talking about this. When you put someone's name up somewhere, it's spoken and it's recognized and it's said, and it becomes part of our fabric of our community, it becomes who we are. And if I'm a person who's experienced that trauma, whether I live here, whether I'm a visitor, whatever it is, you know, that leaves a mark on me. And I don't think we as a community want to do something that deliberately provokes that reaction for someone. I think if we can be supportive, we should be supportive. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you. Anybody else want to have any comments? Okay, so there is a motion on the floor that council rescind the motion made at the November 28th, 2023 council meeting, which stated that council approved Queen Street as the new name for Cornwallis Street. All those in favor of that motion, raise your right hand. All those opposed, raise your right hand. Motion is tied, which is a defeated motion. So the motion once again dies on the floor. So we'll move on. The name is Queen Street with the original motion at this point. So under 13, there's nothing. Under 14, there's Councillor Halverson.
Just a question before we move on. As part of the renaming, there were supposed to be information boards produced. We haven't heard anything about that for Labrador Park and Sylvia Park. There's supposed to have been some like wayfinding signs, and there were supposed to have been information signs. I haven't heard anything about that from staff. Just want to know, where are we with that? And there was talk at some point, I believe you brought up, about doing some interpretive sign for the renaming of Cornwallis Street as well. Will that be included in that?
I certainly hope the interpretive signs at the parks are already started, obviously. And I would hope that we look at interpretive signs on both ends of now Queen Street, which one was Cornwallis, like we had talked about. I hope that staff can look into that, come back with prices, and we can do something moving forward, because this doesn't happen overnight. We have to make sure everybody's addresses is changed with that, you know, the government. This is a process. So I'm hoping during that process, Councillor Halverson, that those things you've asked are being looked into, but I'll ask the CAO for further information.
Through the chair, yes, interpretive panels are included in this year's budget. We're very grateful to Young Canada Works that we did have someone working this summer full-time on African, Nova Scotian and Indigenous histories here in Lunenburg. The research report is complete. And we are now starting the project of creating the draft text for those interpretation panels so that they can, we can undertake public consultation on the draft panels before they are cast in stone. Not saying they will be stone, but again, making sure that we get public consultation on what they will say before they are ordered.
So
Thank you.
just before we move on. So if I may suggest, part of where this process could have been improved is there was a lack of expert consultation. I would suggest, again, we're not here to compel the next council, but I would make a suggestion, and hopefully staff would make the same, that we contract someone who's an expert in Indigenous affairs and Black Nova Scotian affairs to help with language of the interpretive panels before they go to public consultation, to avoid any issues. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm sure staff's taking note of that. Anything else? Motion for adjournment. So moved. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you so much for coming tonight, folks.